I sentence you, is there anything you'd like to say?
Okay. First of all...
All right, that's enough. You're the worst kind of scum on the face of the earth. You're an animal. A filthy, big-lipped beast. I'd like to congratulate the jury of your peers for reaching a verdict. 7 minutes is a new court record. Now get out of my sight, you fuck.
Is it true you were a crack cocaine dealer for 7 years?
I plead the fifth. Anything you say, fifth. Go ahead, ask me a question.
Did you... That'll be all, sir. Good afternoon. I got your sentence reduced to a month, buddy.
Oh!
Crime. It's about as American as pretending that only certain people commit it. But I'll tell you what a real crime is. It's a crime that generations of people will never truly understand the genius of the Chappelle Show, especially in its time period. The skit was amazing because it points out the two different justice systems we have in such a simple way. If you're rich, and bonus points, if not a majority of the points if you're white, the so-called justice system works a little or a lot different for pretty much anyone else. But what if those roles were reversed? How ridiculous would it all seem? Simple, yet brilliant. Like dunking Oreos with a fork. Simple, yet brilliant. It was after that terrible and non-intellectual joke that Tunde wondered, how the fuck is this show still on the air? Welcome to Why You Should Give a Fuck, the show where we don't just have conversations about you, have them with you. Before I go any further, please do take the time. Hit some buttons below. There's a subscribe button, a like button. There's apparently a bell or something. I don't know. Just hit something. We greatly appreciate it. On with the show. That Chappelle skit wasn't just a criticism of the justice system itself. It was a criticism, at least in my opinion, of how we view crime as the public. There's a lot of different ways to talk about crime, but let's keep on this simple trend we're on. Talk about it in two simple categories: blue collar and white collar crimes. Quick side note, I always assumed that you had to be wearing either a blue or white collar in order for your crime to be considered a blue or white collar crime. True story. To be fair, I never claimed to be all that smart. Still don't. But when we're talking about blue collar crimes, generally we're talking about acts of violence, sexual assault, armed robbery, prostitution, basically anything you would have found on a decent episode of Taxicab Confessions. White collar crimes are crimes that include things like mortgage fraud, embezzlement, election law violations, healthcare fraud, so on and so forth. By the way, that last sentence can be used as a substitution for an Ambien prescription. You're welcome. What makes these types of crimes especially dangerous is that they're sometimes so damn hard to find. This isn't to argue about which type of crime is more important than the other, but it is to point out that we tend to, as a society, to put more emphasis on blue collar crimes because they tend to be more obvious, immediate, and, to be perfectly honest, easier to understand. Take, for instance, former presidential candidate and current California State Senator Kamala Harris. She made her mark in an era that was supposedly tough on crime, but meant doing things like threatening to send parents to jail if their children missed school. She refused to prosecute Trump's current Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, also known as the executive director of the Bond Villain Recruitment Program. He ran One West Bank when they foreclosed on tens of thousands of homeowners in California. They did a lot of fucked up shit. They even went as far as to foreclose on a 90-year-old woman who was 27 cents short on her mortgage payment. It doesn't help that we have a media that capitalizes on the fear of something happening to us. I believe the phrase is, if it bleeds, it leads. The focus on blue-collar crime can be compared to new data that shows that there's a major drop in the number of white-collar criminal cases that are brought on by federal prosecutors. I mean, it's not like people are getting less greedy. This didn't just start with the Trump administration either. The fall-off started in the Obama years. White-collar crimes fit into a larger conversation about the class divide. It's baked into our minds that these types of crimes aren't that important to us on an individual basis, and perhaps they may not even be crimes, as one of the lead prosecutors on the Enron case puts it. The standard defense in a fraud case is not that the fraud didn't happen, it's that the fraudster didn't know that he or she was breaking the law, or that whatever the government may think, the fraudulent behavior is business as usual in that industry. Business as usual. It's weird how that always seems to be used as a way to justify fucked up shit. By the way, this isn't even to talk about things like cash bills, which even further highlights what appears to be two legal systems. We're in a free fall when it comes to COVID-19, and that leaves a giant question mark when it comes to what happens with crime overall. But we don't have to look back that far to see how white-collar criminals act in the face of disaster. I mean, 2008 wasn't that long ago. We look at real-world issues like that of George Floyd and the alleged counterfeit bill that would eventually cost him his life. Contrast that with Wells Fargo that just got caught signing people up for pausing their loan payments without their knowledge, which actually sounds like it's not that bad of a thing until you realize that, surprise, surprise, it stopped those same customers from being able to refinance their homes while interest rates are at historic lows. Is anyone going to jail? Doubtful. Yet something like that can have generational consequences for people. This isn't the first time that Wells Fargo got caught doing some bullshit. They opened millions of accounts in customers' names without them even knowing about it, signed them up for credit cards, even transferred money without the customers knowing about it. Again, did anybody go to jail? We're starting to see a pattern here. White-collar crimes have an important impact on our lives overall. According to a study from 2015, it's estimated that white-collar crime results in $600 billion of losses each year. To be clear, that's $600 billion of your money that's basically up in smoke each year. And we just talked about how recently there's been a sharp decline in even prosecuting these crimes. Here's why you should give a fuck. I'm self-diagnosed with ADD. Took an online test. Editorial correction. I took no test of any sort. When putting this segment together, I did what I always do and try to distract myself by looking at articles that have absolutely nothing to do with this topic whatsoever. And even as I wrote this, trying to think more deeply about how we see crime, I found myself fixated on this story about a guy who walked into a convenience store and just seemingly shot another guy randomly and killed him. It was so random and sudden. That kind of immediate emotion is close to impossible to ignore. But when we talk about robbing people of their past, present, and future, that isn't just done through violence. And in all this chaos and confusion, if we don't keep our eyes open, our mouths loud, and our outrage directed in the right directions, we might see that silent killer known as white-collar crime rob us blind. If they already haven't. And that's why you should give a fuck.
As a society, there are a handful of acts that we consider crimes. For example, murder and assault are all indisputably crimes. But what do we do when an act is misclassified as a crime? Immigration has long been a field of politics, being that the country is the top choice for those who want to migrate. But as the conversation continues, the discussion has become more heated, especially ever since Donald Trump descended from that escalator. And that is on the topic of illegal immigration. The concept of illegal immigration in the United States really stemmed from an anti-foreigner sentiment becoming federal law on who could enter and who could not for the first time in the Chinese Exclusion Act. The act came about in large part due to white Americans blaming Chinese immigrants for wages and economic problems. Sound familiar?
So with immigration, you better be smart and you better be tough, and they're taking your jobs and you better be careful.
While scare tactics on immigration aren't new, what they do is continue the narrative that immigration is something the public should be afraid of and that they should protect themselves from the other. And when government agencies, documents, and media use terms like illegals, aliens, or anchor babies, this makes it seem like immigrants aren't even people and that they're a scourge on society. There has been these terms in our society, with media organizations like the Associated Press moving illegal immigrant from their style guide, a resource that journalists use to figure out what is appropriate to say in news stories. But that doesn't mean the US government agrees with the lingo, with the Justice Department, for example, instructing US attorneys' offices to use the term illegal alien as opposed to the more accurate term immigrant. Given the resistance the U.S. has put up against respecting immigrants, it is important to know what the U.S. has agreed to on an international. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document the United States, as a member state of the United Nations, signed in 1948, it outlines the fundamental human rights universally protected, which address the topic of migration. In Article 13, it states the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state, and that everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own. Steps were taken a few years back to address issues within the U.S. immigration system. In 2012, President Obama issued the executive order called Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, and protect young adult unauthorized immigrants from being deported, in addition to allowing them to work legally in the country. I spoke with Catherine Navarez, a Guatemala native and DACA recipient who currently attends Johns University, about her experience as an immigrant, along with how the media and society says that there should be punishments for those who come into the country illegally.
And I think about this all the time. Like when the colonists were going against Britain, one of the main things was taxation without representation, right? They were getting heavily taxed, but there was no representation in parliament, right? And so you can kind of like see that what is happening now. Like immigrants still pay taxes. We pay property taxes, sales tax. My family owns businesses. Our businesses pay taxes. You know, we are consistently paying taxes, and yet we don't get represented in Congress, right? So like I think about that. So when you say you should be punished, we consistently live in fear of family separation. We consistently live in fear of like having some encounter with the law. Like we don't have the flexibility of like messing up even just a little bit, because any encounter with the law alerts ICE. And especially like I'm from Atlanta, and in Atlanta, and if you live in certain counties, any encounter with the law means that you're automatically deported, because they have contracts with immigration where like if anybody's booked in, a minimal crime such as driving without a license means that you are going to end up back in your home country and your family potentially separated.
The threat of family separation is one that weighs heavy on the minds of immigrants. And while DACA protects individuals, children, Navarez points out that it fails to acknowledge and protect the families that come with them.
There's this idea that like we should fix for dreamers but forget about their parents. Like our families are part of our livelihood. Our families are part of our lives. And if you want to give us some sort of protection, you also have to include our parents, because we can only thrive when we don't have to worry about family separation. We can only thrive if we don't have to worry about what's going to happen to our parents and our family members if they encounter the law or whatever it is, you know?
The DACA program has faced its fair share of threats, with politicians and officials like former Attorney General Jeff Sessions calling the program unconstitutional for it to be rescinded.
Since Trump came into office, since 2017 when he took the program away, it has been a shit show. It has been a roller coaster of emotions, trying to plan your life, trying to decide where to go next, what to do with your life, because you're consistently being pulled left and right. You take the program away, then we fight for it, then we win at the Supreme Court, and now you come back and want to take it away again, and then you're trying to change the restriction. It's literally really hard. It's really hard to plan a life in those circumstances.
Despite the uphill battle that is our immigration system, Navarez remains optimistic.
And I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful, but I think it all depends on the political climate. I mean, it's really, really sad to say, because immigrants have been used as leverage to advance a discriminatory agenda. Our livelihoods have been held hostage. You know, even though we have protections, we're still shackled by fear and anxiety of an uncertainty of what will happen tomorrow. And so I hope that we can get a Congress that understands the value that we bring to the country beyond the economic value. Like, we are part of your churches, we are part of your soccer teams, we attend your schools, we work alongside you, and all we want is literally just be able to fully integrate into the American into American society, so that we can fulfill our potential and be able to bring forth a lot of our talents and contributions.
You should give a fuck because the concept of protected movement as a human right should be the basis of our immigration system. Rather than making it a crime, one needs to change their situation. It is human nature, after all, to move whenever an environment or circumstance is no longer suitable to the person. Although you may not be an immigrant, it is going on in our immigration system is indisputably immoral. As a society, we have an obligation to speak out when human rights violations are occurring, and to criminalize a fundamental human right to movement is just plain wrong.
So welcome back to the part of the show where we don't just talk about you, that we talk with you. I am, of course, your humble co-host, Tundugan Falaju.
And I'm your co-host, Genevieve.
And so we'll kind of keep it going as we have been the last few weeks, and we go through comments from last week's episode, and then we will talk about this week's episode. So last week we of course talked about courts, and we had a lot of comments about it. And by the way, I should throw in, sorry for the we had an error in terms of the actual premiere of the episode, in which that's completely my fault. But we pressed forward nonetheless. So Genevieve, go ahead and start us off here with a comment.
All right. So we have a comment from Mikowa Comment that says, if we aren't talking about totally tearing down the system, then we are not serious about equity and humanity. So comments on that.
Yeah. So we actually got a few different comments that were kind of along the same sort of wavelengths. And so for one, I appreciate all the comments. Keep them coming. We love to just engage. So, no matter what the commentary is, we just love to engage about it. But I'll start off on saying this, is that, and there were a few specific comments talking specifically about voting, and how, that's not pushing the envelope far enough as far as like what we need to do. And I'll start by saying that when at least when I was talking about voting in the courts episode, I'm not necessarily just referring to, okay, like, we just need to get a bunch of the right people in Congress, or as, in the presidency, and that's going to fix everything. I'm under no illusion that that's the case, right? That's like the conversation about police, right? That, it's not about just like, some people say, we could just replace some of the bad apples and then that'll take care of it. And that's like, no, that's not going to take care of a lot of the issues concerning the police. So I'm not under the illusion that that's the case. But what I do think is the situation, and specifically about voting, is engagement. That it's about being involved in the political process and understanding exactly sort of what's going on. So because it's a different feeling when you vote for somebody and they just happen to win, and then they end up not doing the shit that you voted, you voted them in for. And that creates a different level of understanding about the process and about what we might need to do to fix it. So when we talk about, revolutions and being radical, I'm all for the radical shit. It's just, I believe that there's, in addition to it, and then I guess to further explain that, it was actually this past primary process that really sort of made me kind of dig my heels into that thought process. Is, I saw a bunch of people, and I don't really care who you voted for, but I saw a bunch of people like say like even in Mississippi, that they were all for things like Medicare for all when they did the exit polls, but then they turned around and voted for Biden, and I was like confused as to why that happened. And what that made me aware of is that there needs to be a bridge, and I think that's sometimes we get so caught up in these conversations on the left about, being radical but when you're, and not all people, but I'm not even saying that's the people who made these comments in our comment section, but some people just think like, oh, you just have to yell at people constantly about being radical, about, taking these quote unquote radical sort of stances as far as our politics go. But sometimes you just need to have conversations with people and just start with the basics and then work your way to some of those, more dense conversations. But what do you think, Genevieve?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that to a certain extent. Like, I think one of the things that is important, like you mentioned, is engagement and education on like what is going on within the system. A lot of the times that what we're finding is that a lot of people don't necessarily know how the political system works, and don't know how the court system works, and it's kind of hard to ask someone to get involved when they don't know how the actual system works. So that's one thing. But I think another thing, and I think this is probably like a good thing why we are seeing these comments, is calling for a complete and total recall of the system itself. Because a lot of the times the conversations that we're having is, trying to tweak the system and, go on the outskirts and the edges and try to fix it that way. But that's not really dealing with the problem head on. The problems that we're dealing with is at its root, at its core, at its base, it's systemic, right? So it kind of makes sense to, say overthrow the system, but how are you going to do that? And also, in order to encourage someone to overthrow a system, you have to educate them on why the system is fucked up in the first place. So that's one of the things that we hopefully try to do on the show is educate and try to make you all more engaged in the content that is impacting and affecting your lives. But at the same time, we're not going to, bullshit you and say like, oh, if you just change this little thing or you just do this little exercise, like everything will be solved. I think a lot of these problems that we're dealing with is very deep and very systemic. So we're going to need big and bold solutions to kind of solve issues that we're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And weirdly enough, I think that actually goes hand in hand with another comment from Virginia B. Britton. This person writes, this is a nice intro for those who are trying to sort out the structures, our corrupt masters. I'm not really too sure about that last part in terms of like what exactly was meant by it, but definitely that for the first part of that, I hope is sort of the case, is that we hope that this all is meant to be sort of an introductory to these conversations and to just spark debate and conversations about all these different topics, because we what's different about this show is we don't just talk about like one specific like news incident that happens, right? We talk about some of these broader topics and they're hard to like kind of wrap your mind around sometimes, and they're hard to sort of pinpoint a way into that conversation. But in any case, we hope that these are just the beginnings of conversations that we're starting, even though that does sound like a little bit cliched, right? Everybody's like, oh, I just hope to begin a conversation and just spark debate, but that's, I think, exactly
hopefully we're adding value. Like we're hoping that we're adding value to these conversations, because a lot of the conversations that are being had are very fluffy, to say the least, and not tagging the issue head on. So we're hoping that our voices are at least, pushing the conversation along a little bit more.
Yeah, we can hope. You got another comment from me?
Comment? Yeah, there's a comment from Get the Pitchforks ! They said, I'd like to see a 14-year term limit for all federal judges, also a 12-year term limit for senators, and an 8-year term limit for congressional representatives. And I thought this was a very interesting comment, because in my section last week on the courts, I did spend quite a bit of time on the issue of term limits and how justices basically they are appointed for life until something happens. It's also nice to see that people are seeing that this is an issue, like this power that basically goes unchecked unless like you basically die out of office and kind of just stay there. So, I don't really know. I don't really have the answer to what the exact right term limit amount should be. I know the guest that we were speaking with, Gabe Roth, executive director of Fix the Court, was saying that he'd like to see an 18-year term limit for Supreme Court justices. But yeah, I don't really know what the exact number should be. Again, even 14 years, like this commenter is saying, seems like quite a bit of time for me. But as we know, there's kind of a reason to having like a longer type of term limit to help insulate from politicalization of the courts and things of that nature. But yeah, 14. I don't know. 14 years does seem like quite a bit of time. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that definitely does seem like quite a bit of time, but I think that we just need to institute something, right? That especially for the Supreme Court, that there's nothing there. It's a lifetime appointment, and so when you, especially like on a federal level, when you have these like lifetime appointments, that just leads to this like it feels like the laws and sort of the commentary that goes on from the judicial system is like it's always stale because they're from a specific time, that like literally the people there are are like are like carved out from a particular time period, and those same and people evolve and yada yada, but there's a good chance that they're not going to evolve too much, based on the fact that people are kind of set in their own beliefs and come from a particular angle. But yeah, the comment is appreciated nonetheless. So good looks. Get the pitchforks. We definitely appreciate the comment. The last one here, and this is a super quick one, but this comment comes from MD, who writes, and these are like, when you set up a person to talk, and then the other, you have another comment. Tunde, we spent too much time talking your ear off, and then they say, me, why isn't this an hour longer, and why do you all stream while I'm at work? So first and foremost, obviously this is on YouTube, so feel free to tune in anytime, and you obviously did to tune in. So we appreciate you watching nonetheless, and we're sorry that we're on while you're at work. But yeah, as far as the hour comment, yeah, I think we try to keep the conversations a little shorter, although we don't always succeed, because I think, just for people's attention span, and then also for consistency too. We don't want to be spending, take 1 hour with one episode and then take like 20-30 minutes with another. So we try to keep it consistent, try to limit ourselves. And also too, I tend to ramble. So you don't want to hear me talk for an hour. That would not be a pleasurable experience. How about you, Genevieve?
Yeah, and also another option is to continue the conversation in social media, because social media doesn't go away. There is no premiere time for social media. So we encourage all of you guys you guys have a lot to say in the comments, and we really love seeing you have your takes on the issues that we're tackling. We encourage you guys to continue the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, all the social media, IG maybe if you want. But yeah, just continue that conversation and keep the ball rolling. And we're watching, we're looking, and maybe we'll feature your comment on the next episode.
Absolutely. Now, pretty fast segue because I want to get this in really quick. But to talk about this week's episode, this week we talked about crime, and so in my blog, I've mainly kind of focused on the sort of the comparison between how we treat blue collar crimes and how we treat white collar crimes. And, I think when I was kind of researching for the segment, what I sort of began to sort of realize is that, a lot of the perception of how we and forget, the government for a second, forget the court system for a second, just talking about how we relate to blue collar crimes and how we talk about blue collar crimes is vastly different than how we treat white collar crimes. And so that's why the main sort of thesis of the segment is that we should be way harder on white collar crime. Not to say that one is, more important than the other, because, if a crime happens to someone, it happens to someone, and they're entitled to feel however they feel about that. But we tend to ignore certain facets of that. And I think that's to our own detriment. That's to our, that handicaps ourselves in terms of really sort of creating a more fair and just world if there's this whole other fucking thing going on that is actually really important when it comes to especially money, right? That a lot of times these white collar crimes, they're taking money from you directly. And so we tend not to be as vocal or be as sort of vigilant for those type of things. So that's why I kind of focused my segment on that. How about you?
Yeah, and I did my segment on kind of taking immigration and how immigration within itself has just been criminalized in the U.S. I guess immigration system. A lot of the times we know that there are crimes out there, but we don't question whether they should be crimes, and sometimes we do reevaluate whether a crime should be a crime. Like I kind of compare it to the marijuana debate of like, oh, marijuana is bad for you, stay away, and also you should go to jail for a very long time if you're carrying it. But over time, we have, as a society, we have evolved on that idea of like whether, you know, using marijuana, carrying marijuana, should it be a crime? And now you see, I mean, obviously there are large disparities in who ends up going to jail because it's still at the federal level, it's still a federal crime. But at state and local levels, they're starting to decriminalize and legalize marijuana. So I see that as a similarity to immigration, where, you know, we have this phenomenon where people want to migrate. Now, should we reevaluate how we try to punish people for doing something that really is protected as a human right? The right to migrate, the right to move when you need to move. It's just human nature. So yeah, that's what I try to examine that in the context of crime and how we view it.
Yeah. You know, so, you know, obviously, you know, as Genevieve said before, put your comments below for, you know, what you think about both segments, as well as, you know, how you think about crime, because I think that it's kind of especially right now with the, you know, everything that's going on in our society right now, it's clearly like a hot button thing. And, you know, one thing that I didn't touch on, or at least touch on it clearly as much is the idea, the role that race plays in it all. And it's not that I don't understand that race, you know, plays a huge role in sort of how crime is perceived and handled. But it's one that it's hard sometimes to get people to empathize when they aren't, you know, that thing, right? So if you're not black, some people just don't understand. They just don't get it, right? And a lot of people right now are, you know, waking up to, oh shit, like this is going on, this is happening, you know, this is unfair system. But some people still, you know, just don't really fully understand, like, oh, well, you know, why are things different? So trying to find a different route into that conversation, I think is sort of what the goal was. But in any case, like I said, put the comment below, you know, what you think about that whole scenario, and of course we'll try to feature the comment when we're back in our last block here. But yeah, we got to go. We're a little over time for what we were trying to budget for. So we'll get back to work, get back to the grindstone. And again, we definitely appreciate everybody for watching, for participating in the conversation. It's so wonderful to watch just all the comments and all the conversation that's happening about these topics we're talking about. They're really, you know, they're really meaningful. I'll say that. So Genevieve, I think we will hit our usual sign off here.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to catch us on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. out west. And we'll see you guys soon. We'll see you guys soon.
Really
all the cars want to make for my sign off. You just ruined the whole shot.
That's all right. That's a good. We naturally accept them into the conversation as well. It's just people telling you they want to be a part of the convo.
Yeah, they have things to say. Yeah. But again, we appreciate you guys' support and continue watching. Watch all the videos.
Yeah. You heard the woman. We'll be back. See you when we see you. Peace.